I met James Carter 5 years ago, and the moment our eyes locked, I began to trust in love again. He was kind, caring, and pretty much all I'd ever hoped for. When he took me to meet his son, Ethan, I felt like our bond had a strong base. Ethan was 17 then, calm, nice, and always polite. I stepped into their lives gently, not wanting to rush things, but over time we grew into a true family. James had a knack for making me feel valued. Our home buzzed with good energy, laughing over hot meals, late night talks, the full deal. He'd hold my hand when we were out, leave sweet notes by the coffee pot, and never left for work without a fast kiss goodbye. I was sure I'd found the kind of love you see on screens. I poured all I had into our marriage, keeping James and Ethan cared for. As Ethan grew up, we got tight. He'd chill with me in the kitchen while I cooked, asking for advice on school, pals, and life bits. He wasn't just my stepson. He became a true buddy, someone who counted on me. I never had kids myself, but with Ethan, that gap didn't hurt anymore. Then, things began to change. James stayed late at work more. His job trips stacked up, and the small, nice things he used to do felt a bit fake. I shrugged it off at first. Every pair hits a tough spot, right? I told myself it was just pressure, made reasons in my mind. He still came home, still sat for dinner, still messaged me during the day. But something felt wrong. One night, I cooked his top dish, cheesy pasta, the one he always said tasted special when I made it. I wanted to shock him, bring back that fire we had. Ethan came in while I set the table, his face all stiff. "I've got news about Dad," he said, his voice wobbly. I froze, hands stuck in place. He sounded torn, like he wasn't sure he should say it. "What's up, Ethan?" He shifted, looking tense. "I saw him with someone." My stomach sank. "What do you mean?" He took a big breath. "A woman, at a diner. More than once." The words hung there, thick. I wanted to brush it off, call it a slip. But the way Ethan stared at me, sad, sorry, a bit mad, made my heart drop. "You sure?" My voice slipped out soft. He nodded. The room felt tight. I looked at the table, the food I'd made now turning my gut. James wouldn't. He wouldn't toss out all we'd built. Ethan touched my shoulder, slow. "I just thought you should know." I nodded, gulping hard. "Thanks." He left, leaving me there, clutching a spoon like it'd hold me up. I told myself Ethan might have mixed it up. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe it was Nada. But deep down, something snapped that night. When James got home, I watched him hard. He kissed my cheek, gave a quick grin. The same guy I'd loved for years. But now, there was this cloud over him, a strain I'd never seen before. I sat facing him at dinner, noting how he fiddled with his fork, how he spoke without meeting my gaze. I wanted to call him out, demand truth, but I couldn't. Instead, I just heard him. He rambled about his day, his job, how beat he was. But it wasn't what he said. It was how he skipped details, how his tone went dull when he said my name. I nodded along, acting like I didn't feel my hands quake under the table. That night, while he slept beside me, I stared at the roof, my mind stuck on repeat. Every "I love you," every vow, every glance that used to feel so true. Had I missed it? Or had I just not wanted to see? Sleep didn't come. Ethan's words kept ringing, doubt twisting me, but part of me held out for another answer. I wasn't gonna rush it. I needed proof. Next morning, James kissed me goodbye like always, but for the first time, I didn't kiss back. The second he left, I grabbed his phone. Locked. He never used to lock it. My hands went cold staring at that screen. He was hiding something. I had to dig deeper another way. I began watching him close, his habits, his face when he spoke. Small stuff popped out. Quick stops, vague reasons, how he kept his phone stuck to him. The guy I'd trusted with all felt like a stranger. That night, I checked our phone bill online. My heart raced as I scanned the numbers he'd been texting. One kept showing up. Late nights, lunch breaks, even weekends. My gut flipped when I saw it. Sarah, my best pal. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my chest. It felt like a sick joke, a bad dream I couldn't wake from. Sarah, my rock for years, the one I'd opened up to, the one who'd laughed with me over coffee in my kitchen. I didn't crack right then. I needed to be sure. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes on James. His excuses started blending together. Late nights at the office, last-second meetings, random errands. Each flimsy story piled up like a shaky stack of cards, ready to topple. Then, Friday night rolled around and he said he had a work dinner. I smiled, nodded, and watched him head out. The second he was gone, I snatched my keys and tailed him. I parked a couple blocks from the restaurant he'd name-dropped, hands locked tight on the steering wheel. My pulse was racing as I scoped out the front. Minutes dragged by. Then there they were, James and Sarah parked at a window table, leaning in close, laughing. His fingers grazed hers, their eyes locked in a way that flipped my stomach. I pulled out my phone, snapped a pic. My hands were shaky, but my head was clear. I peeled out before they could spot me, driving home quiet, my mind a mess of anger and hurt. By the time I walked through the door, I felt hollow. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, looking for the woman who used to believe in love, in trust, in forever. She was gone. Ethan found me sitting in the dark, phone still in my grip. He didn't say a word at first, just plopped down next to me, waiting. I flipped the phone toward him, showing the photo. His jaw tightened, hands balling up. "I'm sorry," he muttered. I shook my head. "You don't need to be." For the first time since this mess started, I let the tears come. Not just for the betrayal, but for the love I'd lost without even clocking it. Sleep wasn't an option that night. I lay there, eyes glued to the ceiling, running through a million what-ifs. Confronting him now would just get me lies and weak excuses. I wanted him to feel this, like I did, watching it all fall apart. So I made a plan. The next night, I cooked his favorite again, cheesy pasta. I took my time, measuring every bit, channeling all my frustration and heartbreak into it. The house smelled cozy, normal, a total mismatch for the chaos inside me. When James walked in, he flashed that clueless grin. Ethan sat across from him, stone-faced. I dished out the food, keeping it all picture perfect. James twirled his fork, totally in the dark, until I opened my mouth. "Ethan, try it first." James's hand froze. Ethan glanced between us, picking up on the tension in my tone. "Go ahead," I pressed, eyes locked on James. Ethan grabbed his fork, but before he could dig in, I leaned in. "I spiced it up with the same excuses your dad's been feeding me." The room went dead quiet. James's fork slipped, clanging against his plate. His face went pale as it hit him, slow and steady. I slid my phone onto the table, the screen lighting up with that photo. His mouth opened, fishing for something to say, but Nada came out. He glanced at Ethan, who was radiating disappointment and heat. "How long?" My voice stayed even, but inside I was a wreck. James swallowed hard. "It's not what you think." I let out a dry laugh. "Oh yeah? What is it then, James? A work chat, random luck, a whoopsie?" He looked away. That was all I needed. Ethan shoved his plate back, jaw locked. "I looked up to you," he said, his tone cutting deep. "I had your back." James reached for him, but Ethan jerked away. "Don't!" That hit James harder than anything I could have thrown at him. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. "I'm not gonna yell or beg. Just know you trashed something real. And for what?" James had nothing. The guy who'd been my world now looked tiny, shrunk down to just guilt and regret. I turned to Ethan. "You don't have to crash here tonight." He nodded, getting up without a word. I followed him out, leaving James alone at the table, staring at food he couldn't stomach anymore. I walked away that night. No big scene, no last-ditch plea for answers. I'd given everything to a guy who'd tossed it like it was nothing. Staying would have meant swallowing the lies, pretending love could bounce back from this. It couldn't. Next morning, James called. I let it ring. Then he texted, saying sorry, begging to talk. But there was nothing left. Apologies don't fix betrayal. Regret doesn't patch up trust. Ethan stuck with me for a couple days. quiet, sorting through his own feelings. His dad had been his hero, the guy he looked up to. Now that was toast. One night, he finally spoke up. I don't get it. Why do people wreck the ones who care about them? I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a solid answer for Ethan. Maybe James figured he'd never get caught. Maybe he told himself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe he never really loved me the way I loved him. But the why didn't matter anymore. What did was the truth. I turned to Ethan and shared something I wished I'd figured out sooner. Love's not just about feelings, you know? It's about choices. Real love doesn't sneak around, doesn't stab you in the back, doesn't leave you wondering what you're worth. He nodded, getting it in a way he hadn't before. His dad's mess had hit him hard too, but it also showed him the kind of guy he'd never turn into. James kept trying to get through to me. One time he showed up at my place, looking worn out, asking for a shot to explain. I let him talk, but his words just bounced off me. He said it was a slip-up, that he still cared, that he didn't want to lose us. I stared at him and felt zilch. Whatever love was there had turned into something else. Clear, cold truth. You already lost it, I told him. He walked off, and that was the last I saw of him. Word got back through some friends that Sarah was out of his life too. Whatever they had wasn't worth the mess it made. Moving on wasn't a breeze, but it had to happen. Pain's loud, you can't ignore it. But it's also a teacher. I figured out that love shouldn't cost you your self-worth. Someone who's really got your back won't ever make you second-guess it. Ethan and I stayed tight. He went his own way, tougher and smarter for it. One day, he shot me a text. Thanks for showing me what real love's supposed to be. I'm not settling for less. That hit me right. The betrayal had taken a lot, but it didn't steal my power to put myself first. And honestly, that was the biggest win in the end.
This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.